Okay, folks, Anna, I'm hopefully recording this and we'll see how it turns out. I'm at Pearland on the runway, already started, already taxied, sitting on the runway, and I'm just going to demo a flight in the pattern. So the engine is running, obviously, and I've got my landing and taxi lights on, which is different than maybe some people. Some people just turn on the landing light. I like both lights for bird protection, and at night gives me more light. Um, I have my transponder set to 1200, which is VFR. I talked about that. It's just every airplane that's not on an instrument clearance has 1200 squawking, and that's so the air controllers can separate you from all the other traffic. My engine instruments are normal. I've got one notch of flaps, and you can see the little recording thing up here. And without any further ado, I'm going to go ahead and take off the emergency brake. And I'm going to add power and feed in rudder to maintain center line. My rudders are pretty sensitive. I may have to tune those down just a little bit. But now I'm just sort of glancing at my airspeed indicator, looking for 55 knots. And there it is. So I'm just going to raise the nose and fly off. And when I get to about 300 feet, I will raise my flaps. And I'm trimming to take the pressures out so I can take my hands off. My hands are off now, so my airplane is flying pretty steadily. And coming up on 300 feet, I'm going to go ahead and raise my flaps. And just for reference, Katie's house is right down here, right about there. That's Katie and James's house. Okay, and I'm going to go ahead and turn to Crosswind. I'm still climbing to 1,000 feet. Flaps are fully up. And if I put 320 on my right wing, right there, the heading for Crosswind is 230. And I've got a climbing attitude by how close my glare shield is to the outside horizon. And I'm going to go ahead and start my turn to downwind here almost right away. That was probably too much of a delay, but we'll see. There's 1,000 feet, and I'm going to go ahead and reduce my power a little bit since I'm no longer climbing. And I'm looking for a heading of 140 for the downwind heading. Right at 1,000 feet, so right about there. So you can see that we're almost right over this road down here. And you can see that the runway on a heading of 140 on downwind with my attitude right for the level, so I want to get my VSI to 0. Looking to the left, the runway bisects my strut about halfway between this step here and the underside of the wing. Whoops. I did a little bit of climbing there, so I'm going to come back down again. I'm also going to set one notch of flaps. Okay, and I'm a little high, so I'm going to come down a little bit more. And I'm going to start my turn when I'm 45 degrees looking back at the runway, which on the ground is this little, is 2351, this street here. Okay, and I'm going to start my turn right as I cross that road, 2351, and I'm going to put in my second notch of flaps. And I want to be between 700 and 600 when I get to the 90 or on base leg, which is 050 degrees heading wise. So when I roll out on 050, I'm a little high still, That's okay. You can see the runway out there, and I'm going to start my turn to final. And as I do that, I am going to put my flaps all the way to full. And I'm going to slow. See where the runway is. I'm going to slow to between 65 and 70 knots on my airspeed indicator. I'm going to raise my nose a little because I don't want to get too low here. But you can see the eye picture, or the picture out the front window, where the runway is in relation to the nose of the airplane. And there's 70 knots right there, and that's about what I like. Even though the band is 65 to 70, I prefer 70. I like to have a little extra airspeed when I touch down. And I'm going to demo a touch and go this time. Okay, so I'm going to start pulling back the throttle all the way to idle. So it's now underpowered, and I'm going to try to aim for the center line. And I'm just trying to flare to bleed off airspeed. Stay on center line. And now, before I go forward on the throttle, I'm going to move my flaps all the way up. There they go, all the way up. And now I'm going to start moving the throttle forward. So instead of 1 notch, I'm clean, no flaps. That's because I already had some airspeed. There's my takeoff speed. And if you're a little bit fast, that's okay. You have to trim the nose up a little bit so you don't have that downward pull. And since I don't have flaps, I don't have to worry about that 300 feet. I just want to accelerate. Now I'm clear of obstacles, so I'm going to lower the nose just a little bit to accelerate between to 75 to 80 knots for the climb. And right about here, crossing that's Dixie Farm, I'm going to start my turn to Crosswind, keeping the airspeed between 70 and 80 knots. And you're still full throttle. And I'm going to start, since I'm approaching 1,000 feet, a couple hundred to go, and I want to roll out a 230 briefly, look out there, and see, I know from before I want to turn to fly almost right over that highway there. And reaching 1,000 feet, I want to set that attitude with my glare shield in relation to the horizon that is 0 VSI. So I'm going to be level flight. And now I'm just turning to 140, which is my downwind heading. And now that I'm established on that, I'm looking to put the runway, about halfway down my strut. And I have to trim a little bit nose down, since I had to trim nose up after takeoff. And it's actually a little bit right about there, wings level. It's a little bit more than halfway up the strut. 140 on the heading. I'm a little high again. Maybe you can do better than me. You want to maintain 1,000 feet. And I'm going to go ahead and put 1 notch of flaps in. And then we're looking for 2351 to start our final turn. And I want to slow down to about 90 knots, which is right about there. And we're crossing the 2351, pulling the power back, lowering the nose, starting down, and setting my 2nd notch of flaps. Holding the power back, and I'm turning to base leg, which again is 050 on the heading. And you can see I'm doing a standard rate turn. And there's about 050 looking out, so I'm going to start my turn because I don't want to overshoot too much here. And I'm going to go to my full flaps all the way down. Looking where the runway is. Looks like I'm overshooting. That's okay. Just keep the turn coming. Slight overshoot is not a big deal. And just fly back to center line. Looking for 70 knots on the airspeed. Again, the 65 to 70. This would be a full stop. That same sight picture. Trim it up so you can take hands off if you had to. And as the glare shield starts covering up the road before the runway, you can start pulling the power back all the way to idle. So it's now at the hard stop, both hands on the yoke, and just sort of flare it in. Just let it touch down. And now just steer, don't get on the brakes right away. Just sort of now apply the brake. Okay, that's good. Now if you look at the runway, there's some red or yellow lines that indicate where the taxiway is. Sometimes it's kind of hard to see the taxiways, but these yellow lines kind of tell the story. And then just feed in a little bit of rudder to turn left. Remember, your yoke doesn't steer like a steering wheel. Checking the rudder, the taxiway both ways because you're going to taxi in. We're just going to taxi down here. And there's the line guys right there. Now notice he'll put his hands up here eventually, I think. Or maybe not. There he is. He's not our guy. He's obviously for somebody else, but we're going to use him anyways. Come to a stop. And set your parking brake. And go down. We'll go through a real quick shutdown checklist. Okay, so first thing we want to turn things off. I usually turn off the transponder first. Then I'll kill the two strobe lights, the nav lights, landing and taxi lights. I'll turn off both avionics buses. Turn off the alternator because I don't need that now. And then I'm going to shut down the engine by using the mixture. So pull that all the way back. I'm going to continue so I can finish the shutdown, which is turning the magnetos off, and then turning the battery off, and then turning the beacon light off. And that's it. So let's stop the recording.